Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Brandis Friedman and thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, Chicago public school students went back to school this week, but with very few black men at the head of the classroom. Hear about an effort to change that. The child pornography trial of R. Kelly in Chicago. A look at the witness testimony so far and what's next. With rents skyrocketing and a competitive housing market, rental scams are on the rise. We talk about how to avoid getting taken in. And we often hear about the historic Pullman porters who worked the country's railroads, but a new exhibit explores the experience of the Pullman maids. First off tonight, for Chicago public school students, it's possible to go from kindergarten to high school and never have a black man as a teacher. According to CPS data, fewer than 4% of CPS teachers are black men. And in a school district where 36% of students are black, that is a striking imbalance. Nationwide, the figure is even lower, just 2%. Last fall, 3 Chicago high schools instituted a pilot program to address that imbalance. The Intro to Urban Education curriculum is designed to encourage young black and Latino men to envision themselves at the head of the class. Joining us with more on how it works are Mila Kumpelova, who reported on the pilot program for Chalk Beat Chicago, Troy LaRaviere, head of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association, and Iona Calhoun-Batiste, Senior Director of Programs at Thrive Chicago, which administers the program. Thanks to all three of you for joining us. Iona Calhoun-Batiste, let's start with you, please. Why is it so important to have black men at the head of Chicago's classrooms, particularly for young black students, for black boys?
Thank you so much. It's particularly important for young black males to see themselves reflected in the everyday teachings and learnings so that they can feel more empowered, more aligned and welcomed into an actual educational system. And what we've seen and what we know is that historically there have been fewer and fewer black male educators that have been taking the helm and that have been really stepping into the role of being an educator to provide that role model, guidance, and inspirational hope to our young black and Latino boys in our schools. So it is really critical, and that is really why we created this Intro to Urban Education curriculum in which to build some self-esteem, self-awareness, identity, and making school environments feel comfortable and welcoming to young black males. And we know all of that leads to positive education and outcomes.
Of course. So, Mila Kumpelova, you talked to a student, Khalil, who is part of this pilot program. What did he tell you about why he joined the program?
Sure. I met Khalil at Diet High School, where the overwhelming majority of students are Black and low income. He was one of the students in the Intro to Urban Education class there. And he was somebody who had gone into the class feeling that a career in education might really be for him. And he spoke about the impact that the 2 Black male teachers he had during his time in CPS had on him. His sense of really being able to connect with them and the sense that they saw him and understood him more fully than other educators could at times.
Troy LaRaviere, why don't we see more black male teachers?
I love these programs you're talking about, but I prefer to look at it from a root cause analysis. It's like looking at a corporation with an epidemic of sexual harassment and saying, why don't we see more women here? Without dealing with the fact that there's an epidemic of sexual harassment, we have to look at there's an epidemic of systemic racism in CPS. CPS is on record, exposed by WBEZ, if I remember correctly, of weeding out, having a program to weed out Black teachers until it was exposed and they had to get rid of it. They created a program similar to that to weed out Black and Latino principals that still exists today, called the Principal Eligibility Policy. You look at the difference in investment in curriculum offered in schools where the students are majority middle class and white versus what curriculum and investments are in schools that are attended by Black students. Look at Harriet Tubman School in Lindblom and what's happening to their Black principals right now versus what CPS did to the white principal at Jones. With the white principal at Jones, they did what they were supposed to do and handled it properly. They handled the Black principals at Tubman and Lindblom as if they were guilty before even investigated. So if I'm a student and I see this, I experience this inequity in curriculum, I see how Black men and Black women are treated when they become educators by this district. Who's more likely to become an educator?
And of course, you know, before you moved over to the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association, you were a principal. Before that, you were a teacher. What was it that made you want to get into the teaching profession at the time that you did?
My girlfriend, who's now my wife and mother of my son. I was in the Navy and I didn't want to do college. I didn't want to get into, I didn't want to do anything involving where I had to go to college. I didn't think I'd be successful. But my girlfriend, who went to Whitney Young, who went to the University of Illinois when I got out of the Navy, she made me go to college. And then I read the autobiography of Malcolm X and was extremely inspired by that. And once I did really well in college, I looked at my experience as a CPS student and thought, I almost didn't go to college. What was it about my experience in CPS that made me have such a low assessment of myself? Here I am with straight A's at the University of Illinois and thought I'd fail out. What was it about CPS that gave me this low assessment of myself? So I decided to become a teacher so that I could go into CPS and change it for other students who didn't have the Margaret, that's my wife's name, Margaret, that I had. And then I realized it's not about just teachers. There's a systemic thing happening here that I had to address, which is why I eventually took the path that led me to the presidency of this association.
Okay, so of course, you know, that's one success story. Not every student is going to have that. Iona, would you give us an idea of what the Intro to Urban Education curriculum looks like?
Sure. It consists of 8 units. And let me just go back and say that this curriculum was created by administrators, educators, community partners, individuals who have expertise in education. And so this curriculum is broken into 8 different units in which it takes students through a general understanding of who they are, their history, background, content, and understanding of Chicago, understanding of Chicago communities, and then it very specifically goes into understanding the school system and school environments, how one is able to use knowledge to execute power, to inspire others, etc. The best thing about this curriculum that I find is going to be really fun this year is that young men are going to be able to steward and have and run their own classrooms for at least 2 to 3 weeks this year. And so we're really excited in seeing those that want to step up to the challenge and how they feel before they instruct a classroom of younger peers, and then how they feel afterwards. It would really be telling to us. A little bit of early student teaching, it sounds like. Mila, how did the pandemic underscore the need for more Black male teachers?
We here at Chalk Beat Chicago have done quite a bit of reporting over the past couple of years on the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Black and Latino boys and young men, really widening disparities in attendance, grades, college enrollment, and other outcomes that were already some of the widest historically, both here in Chicago and nationally. So we, as part of that reporting, try to follow up and really look at what are some of the solutions, what are ways that school systems can address this disproportionate impact, and this idea of bringing in more male teachers of color and really stepping up efforts to also retain them once schools hire them. was really coming up again and again and again.
Iona, what can schools do for their Black students now that will allow them to see teaching as a future possibility for them?
Think about the system and the environments in which they're creating, making sure that we have young Black males that see themselves, that have role models there in the schools, having an opportunity for males of color to talk about things that are happening in their community, and then showing them the pathways forward, right? Everyone is not going to be an educator, and we understand that, but everyone should have a pathway forward after they matriculate and graduate through high school. And we hope that our curriculum does that.
Troy, we've got 30 seconds. What role do principals play in hiring teachers, and how can principals help with recruiting more?
I think that principals play a key role. I think principals play a key role in hiring teachers, and they have to cast a broad net, but principals and all stakeholders have to get involved in helping to determine the political leadership that creates the inequities that they have to work against. We don't want to have to work against these inequities in order to bring these folks. We want these inequities gone, and that means a mayor, a school board, and a CEO that actually believes in Black and brown children.
Okay, a lot of work to do. My thanks to the three of you for joining us, Mila Kumpalova, Iona Calhoun-Batiste, and Troy LaRaviere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Up next, details from the courtroom of R. Kelly's Chicago trial. Stay with us.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/dailybriefing and sign up.
Tearful witness testimony, sexually graphic video evidence, and accusations of lies and extortion. These are just some of the events over the past 2 weeks in the federal child pornography trial of Chicago-born R&B singer R. Kelly. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson has been following the case and joins us now with more. Matt, welcome back. Remind us what R. Kelly is on trial for.
So Kelly is facing more than a dozen different charges, including producing and receiving child pornography, enticing minors into criminal sexual activity, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Prosecutors have alleged that he produced multiple sexually graphic VHS tapes depicting himself with a 14-year-old girl in the 1990s, then allegedly worked with his co-defendants Milton Brown and Daryl McDavid to keep those videos concealed from the public and keep that minor victim away from law enforcement so that she couldn't testify during Kelly's previous trial on similar charges in state court here in Cook County back in 2008, where he was acquitted.
Wow. Okay. So this trial has just wrapped its second week. What are some of your key takeaways?
So the prosecution's key witness this far has been that 14-year-old victim. She's now a 37-year-old woman who's testifying under the pseudonym of Jane. And she's told jurors during the first week about how Kelly sexually abused her hundreds of times while she was a minor, and really kept her under his control for many, many years. Jurors were also shown portions of those tapes showing Kelly's alleged sexual abuse of that girl. Jane's mother testified earlier this week that their family felt threatened and feared for their safety from Kelly and his associates if they were to go public about their daughter's alleged abuse. And this past week, jurors have heard from a former associate of Kelly's who testified that he was contracted by Kelly and his team to track down one of these illicit VHS tapes when it went missing, and from Kelly's ex-girlfriend, Lisa Van Allen, who spent several hours on the witness stand both Thursday and Friday, talking about how she took those tapes from Kelly and later feared that she could be killed as she worked with Kelly and his team to try to get those tapes back.
Wow. Okay. So we know that he had a recent conviction in New York where a federal jury found him guilty last year on 9 counts of sex trafficking and racketeering. Remind us how this trial is different from that one.
So in the New York case, Kelly was convicted of basically using his fame to recruit underage girls to engage in illegal sexual activity with him. This current trial instead deals with his alleged production of these specific videotapes and then his work to try to conceal those and obstruct justice during that 2008 trial, again, on similar charges to this, where he was testified because he was, in part, because he was able to keep this now woman, Jane, from testifying.
Okay. So do we know about how much longer we think this trial will last and what we might expect in the coming weeks?
So this trial is expected to last about a month. So through 2 weeks, we're at about the halfway point. As for what's next, prosecutors still plan to call other alleged victims who say they were sexually abused by Kelly while they were minors as well many years ago. And we've still yet to hear from any defense witnesses. The defenses for both McDavid and Brown and Kelly all are expected to call witnesses. And McDavid himself may even take the witness stand later in the trial.
Okay. Matt Masterson keeping an eye on it for us. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can catch up on Matt's coverage of the R. Kelly trial on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. Up next, what to watch for when it comes to rental scams. Stay with us. A tight housing market and rising interest rates are shutting out many would-be home buyers. That's put the squeeze on Chicago's rental market. According to city data, 60% of Chicagoans live in rental properties. A June report by real estate platform Domu finds the median rent for one-bedroom apartments in Chicago is up 8% since January. And competition for apartments is intense, leaving the city's renters, which includes many black Chicagoans, as more vulnerable targets for scammers and shady landlords. Here to talk about what to look out for and how to protect yourself are Dennis Horton, director of the Rockford Regional Office of the Chicago Better Business Bureau, and Michelle Gilbert, legal and policy director of the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. Thanks to you both for joining us. Dennis Horton, let's start with you, please. What are some common scams that renters might encounter right now?
Well, what happens generally is that people looking for apartments will go online and find what they think is the perfect apartment property for them. They'll see great pictures with great amenities and low rents, and that's where the trouble begins.
What happens after that? They see these pictures, the sort of the scam, and then what do they run into?
They see the pictures, they see the scams, they talk to a landlord who they never actually will be in contact with other than usually through emails or text messages. And then they're asked to complete an application, pay the deposit, first month's rent, and then they do all of those things and they never hear from that landlord again.
And it turns out the alleged landlord was masquerading basically as someone who had the rights and the ownership to rent that apartment, which is actually not even theirs. Michelle Gilbert, who's the most vulnerable to rental scams?
Well, certainly people who are having a hard time finding housing. And we have litigated these cases where someone holds him or herself out to be an agent for the landlord and sometimes even has keys, allows a tenant to move in. The tenant will pay rent, and before they know it, they're getting a notice that the person that they've been dealing with is not the agent for the property. And then they're forced out of the property, forced to be evicted in very short order. And of course, it happens, just as you said, because the rental market is so tight right now.
Dennis Horton, what responsibility do owners have, though, to avoid scams being perpetrated using their properties? Is there anything they can do?
Owners should also make sure that they are checking online to make sure that their properties aren't being posted without their knowledge. That's when people go to online methods to find properties, they don't know that the one that's being posted there isn't legitimate.
Michelle, what are some of the most common complaints about landlords you see in your work?
Well, of course, we're the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. So we talk to a lot of tenants who are having problems getting conditions repaired. There is a lot of information out there, and tenants have some pretty good rights here in the city of Chicago and also in suburban Cook. Chicago has had a landlord-tenant ordinance for quite a while, and most people are aware of it, but the suburban ordinance passed a year ago, and probably people are less familiar. But tenants do have rights. And we shared some resources that will be posted on this website with places where tenants can turn to learn those rights from the city or county government, our office. Also, if people are looking at apartments, of course, we have to follow the old rule that our grandmothers taught us, that if something seems to be good to be true, it probably is. So, go with your gut if you think that there are any questions. But there are places to verify as well. The Cook County Tax Portal can be searched with just an address, and a tenant could check to see whether the name that the county has listed is the same name as the person that they're dealing with. And they shouldn't be afraid to ask questions.
Dennis, what's your advice for how to avoid these scams?
The number one thing to do is if when you're asked to pay those deposits, that if you're asked to pay through an online app like Venmo or Zelle, you are dealing with a scammer. Also, make sure that you, as a tenant, that you do look online for that address. If you search online for that address and it pops up again, you'll know that it's being used as a scam property. And make sure that you go see the property in person. You don't want to just take the word of someone who you haven't actually met, because very often these purported landlords give you an excuse for why they can't meet with you, that they are out of town, or that the property has several different people who are looking for this property, so you need to hop on it right now or you're going to lose out. Make sure that you are being proactive and going and seeing the property. And if you knock on the door and someone opens that door and says it's not for rent, then you have saved yourself possibly identity theft and losing a lot of money.
Yeah, it's going to be a big red flag, obviously. Michelle, what advice do you have for tenants who are looking for housing and they might have evictions on their record?
Exactly. Thanks so much for asking that question. First of all, I would caution landlords not just to rely on the fact that an eviction was filed, because a lot of times, in fact, we know in the city of Chicago, 40% of all evictions do not result in judgments against the tenant. In fact, we know because of the racial impact of eviction that if a landlord denies someone a house just because a case was filed, they're probably acting illegally and against fair housing. For a tenant, check the public record of case filings. We've been doing a lot of work on sealing old eviction records, and it's sad how many cases we find where the tenant isn't aware of the old eviction record until a credit report is run, and they've wasted the money for the credit report, and they're probably not going to get the housing. So check your credit, check the public access. You may be eligible to have that record sealed. You can contact us. Again, the contact information will be available. And finally, I would encourage policymakers. We know that these old eviction records make it very difficult for people to find and keep stable housing. And we know that it's an issue that impacts on the basis of race. And people who care about housing or care about achieving racial justice need to address the issue of these old eviction records, either the judges through administrative orders or the General Assembly by addressing the Eviction Act.
Something to be taken up by officials more so than landlords and renters or homeowners. We'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Dennis Horton and Michelle Gilbert for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Up next, you may have heard of the Pullman porters, but what about the Pullman maids? Inside a new exhibit exploring their stories. An exhibit at the Newberry Library is exploring the experience of black maids while working in Pullman train cars. The exhibit features photos, documents, and other historical artifacts, including one maid's handwritten recollection of her work history, highlighting both the benefits and challenges they experienced while traveling as black women during the Jim Crow era. With long-distance travel reflecting both luxury and American progression, curator Miriam Thagard says she hopes attendees gain better insight into the realities of not only traveling as a woman during that time, but specifically as a black woman. Thagard's work extends beyond this exhibition in a book titled Riding Jane Crow, African-American Women on the American Railroad. The Newberry's free exhibit, Handmaidens for Travelers, the Pullman Company Maids, is on display until September 16th. And that is our show for this weekend. If you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And join me and Paris Schutz next week at 7 on Chicago Tonight. And Monday night at 8 p.m., join me for our next virtual community conversation. We'll talk about education equity as the new school year gets underway. To RSVP, visit WTTW.com/events. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.